Hello and good evening, everyone. I hope I'm audible and loud and clear. Okay, so welcome to another live session on Eden 2. Today, today's live session is exclusively for our first year BDS students. Their university examination is approaching soon. So today in this session, like Eden 2 had come up with a revision program for the first year BDS students. And already like the anatomy subject is over. So today we'll be mainly focusing on dental anatomy and dental histology. Now, among dental anatomy and dental histology, we are going to mainly focus on dental anatomy today. So as you all know, from dental anatomy, you can get questions asking you to describe about the various morphological aspects of different teeth. Okay, so I'll tell you like which teeth are like really important so that these teeth, like you must study thoroughly about the morphological aspects of these teeth before appearing for your university examination. Okay, so first and foremost, the molars. Okay, the maxillary first molar and the mandibular first molar, extremely important. Definitely, like lots of essay questions had been asked regarding the morphological aspect of the maxillary and the mandibular first molars. Very important. If it is not asked as an essay question, then sometimes the questions on uh, the particular aspect of the first molar can also be asked as a short note question. Okay, they can ask the question like describe about the occlusal aspect of the maxillary first molar or the occlusal aspect of the mandibular first molar. Yes, questions like that can also be expected from dental anatomy. Now, other than this, uh, the molars, the next important tooth is canines. Okay, the maxillary and the mandibular canines. Very important and frequently asked question. The maxillary canines is like frequently asked question. Canines are really important. Then the third one is premolars. Okay, the first premolar and the maxillary first premolar and the mandibular second premolar. Both are really important. And if you look at the previous question papers also, lots of question has been asked regarding the premolars. Okay, then they can also ask questions like the difference between the first and the second maxillary premolars, like that also the questions can be asked. Okay, so you must be prepared for that. Then next is the incisors, especially the maxillary central incisor. Okay, from that also questions have been asked. Okay, so these four teeth are really important. The molars, maxillary first and the mandibular first molars, then the maxillary and the mandibular canines, then the premolars. Okay, the maxillary first premolar and the mandibular second premolar, extremely important. Then comes the maxillary central incisor. Okay, so all these teeth are really important and you should not skip these teeth at all before attending your university examination. Okay, these teeth are really, really important. Now, in today's session, we'll be mainly discussing about the canines. Okay, so both the maxillary and mandibular canines we'll be discussing in detail. Okay, all the morphological aspects of the maxillary and mandibular canines from all the aspects like the labial, lingual, mesial, distal aspects we'll discuss in detail. And not just from the theoretical point of view, but from the practical point of view also. Okay, for the practicals, there you may get the carving for maxillary canines. Okay, maxillary canine is like a favorite, like a carving tooth for the examiners. So you should know about the carving procedure for the maxillary canines. Towards the end of this session, we will discuss that also. Then for the spotters, okay, for the spotters, they can keep a natural human tooth. Okay, usually permanent dentition only. Uh, they can keep a permanent natural human tooth and ask you to identify whether it is like a maxillary canine or mandibular canine, whether it is a maxillary left canine or maxillary right canine, like that you have to identify. Okay, such teeth can be placed for the spotters also. So that also I will tell you like how to identify the teeth, whether it is like a maxillary canine or mandibular canine, and whether it is like left side or right side. I'll tell you how to identify it. Okay, so we will discuss everything about the canines today, like not just from the theoretical point of view, but from the practical point of view also. We'll discuss everything related to the canines today. Okay. So, like while I was going through the past, like 10 to 15 years of the question paper, these canine questions were like very frequently asked in most of the question papers. Okay. For either in the like the essay question or as a short note question also. For the essay question, you can see they can ask like describe in detail the morphological aspect of the permanent maxillary canine and enumerate the differences between the maxillary and the mandibular canine. Okay, so this is an essay question. And see the morphological aspects of the permanent maxillary canine, and you have to tell the difference between the maxillary and the mandibular canine. You have to draw a table and tell the difference between the maxillary and the mandibular canine. The next is the chronology and the morphological aspects of the permanent maxillary canine. Okay, the maxillary canine alone is asked, and you have to describe in detail, drawing a table regarding the chronology and all the morphological aspects also. Okay, sometimes they will be very specific regarding the chronology table and the dimensions. Okay, so you must definitely have a look at the chronology table and the dimensions of each tooth also. Okay, usually they will not ask the dimensions, but if you know the dimensions, you can mention it. Okay, chronology, but they will definitely ask. Okay, so what you can do is take a printout of the chronology table. If you look at the Wheeler's textbook of dental anatomy, there are like two tables. Okay, one is the chronology of the deciduous dentition, and another one is the chronology of the permanent dentition. Okay, take a printout of it or draw a table in an A4 size paper and stick it where you can daily see it. Okay, and daily look at those tables. Okay, then only those numericals will stay in your mind. Okay, so try doing this. And next, the question is list the sequence of eruption for deciduous and permanent canines. Okay, the sequence of eruption was asked, and enumerate again the difference between the maxillary and mandibular canine. Okay, now next is a short note question. Okay, they had asked you to describe about the morphology of only the labial aspect of the mandibular canine. Okay, so such questions can also be asked in the short note section. One aspect, either if it's molars, usually the occlusal aspect is asked. If it's the anteriors, they can ask you about the labial aspect or the lingual aspect of any of the anteriors. Okay, then the next is also a short note, the difference between the maxillary and mandibular canine. Okay, so the table of differences between the maxillary and mandibular canine is also included in this session today. We'll be discussing it towards the end of the session. Okay, so these are some of the questions that you can expect regarding the maxillary and the mandibular canines. Okay, so let's begin with the maxillary canine, permanent maxillary canine. Okay, when you are asked an essay question about the permanent maxillary canine, always start with the contents. Okay, so the contents should include what all you are going to write, like the introduction and the morphological aspect, which include like labial aspect, lingual aspect, mesial aspect, distal aspect, like that. The main headings that you write in the answer sheet, put it as contents. Okay, and then start with the answer. Okay, so while starting with the answer, give a small introduction about the permanent maxillary canine. If you're going to write about the permanent maxillary canine, then give a small introduction about that particular tooth. Okay, always write in points like this. And so permanent maxillary canine is the third tooth from the midline. Okay, as you can see, it is the third tooth from the midline, and it is considered as the corner teeth of dentition. Okay, there is some confusion regarding the cornerstones of dentition. So if you look at the Wheeler's textbook of dental anatomy and all, you can see that under the maxillary canine section also they had mentioned like it is the cornerstone of dentition. And in the molars chapter also they had mentioned like it is the cornerstone of dentition. Okay, so to avoid a confusion, this canine should be considered as the corner teeth of dentition, and first molars are generally considered as the cornerstone of dentition. Okay, why the cornerstone of dentition? Because these first molars are the first permanent tooth to erupt by the age of 6 years, and they guide in the eruption and the positioning of the other permanent teeth. Okay, so they are considered as the cornerstones of dentition. Now, this canine is the longest teeth in the mouth. Okay, especially the roots of the maxillary canine. Okay, they are the longest in the mouth. And since the roots are really long, they are the most stable teeth also. Okay, so they are the most stable teeth and the longest one also. Resembles like a carnivore only. Like if you look at the in the carnivores, definitely the canine will be much more sharper. But in ours, it is not as sharp. But yes, the cusp is like really pointed. Okay, and it is a single cusp teeth, so it's also called as cuspids, and it is also called as eye teeth. Okay, why eye teeth? Because the canines are usually located just below the eye. Okay, so that's why they are also called as eye teeth. And one is present in each quadrant. We have like 4 canines, 2 maxillary and 2 mandibular canines are there. And the main function of these canines are to for cutting and tearing of the food. Okay, so this is about the introduction points that you can write for the maxillary canine. Now, if they had asked about the chronology, okay, then definitely you should include this table in your answer sheet. Okay, so the chronology of the maxillary canines, the first evidence of, you should write 4 points mainly. One is the first evidence of calcification, then when the enamel completion is happening, then when the eruption is happening, and when the root completion is happening. Okay, so the first evidence of calcification for maxillary canines, both for maxillary canines and mandibular canines, it is around 4 to 5 months only. Okay, enamel completion, it is also the same for the maxillary and the mandibular canines. It is 6 to 7 years only. But the eruption time is where there is a difference between the maxillary and the mandibular canines. The eruption for the maxillary canines, it happens around 11 to 12 years. Okay, a little bit late. Okay, but in case of mandibular canines, they erupt a little bit faster. Okay, by the 10 years itself, by 10 years itself, the mandibular canine will erupt into the oral cavity. Okay, and root completion from the like the year of eruption, just add like 2 to 3 years. Okay, that will be the year for root completion. Okay, so the root completion for the maxillary canines, it usually takes place by 13 to 15 years, and for the mandibular canines, it happens usually by 12 to 14 years. Okay, while studying this dental anatomy, this is one thing that you should really like you should do it, or you can do it for making things easier. That is compare and study. Okay, when you are studying about the maxillary canine, always compare with that of the mandibular canine and then study. Okay, so things will be a little bit easier for you. Okay, like that for molars also. When you are learning about the first molar, maxillary first molar, read about the mandibular first molar and then compare and study. Okay, things will be a little bit different, easier for you. Or the maxillary first molar and the maxillary second molar, compare and study. Things will be easier. Okay, then the incisors also, central, and compare the central with the lateral. Premolars also, compare the first premolar with the second premolar, such that compare and study. It will be much more easier, and you will be able to retain the information easier also. Okay, so always make tables for dental anatomy. These comparison tables are really important. Okay, so that's about the chronology of the maxillary and the mandibular canines. Next, there was a question on the sequence of eruption of the deciduous and permanent canines. Okay, so if you look at the eruption time of the deciduous maxillary canine, it is around 16 to 22 months. And for the mandibular canine also, it is like nearly the same. Okay, 17 to 23 months only. in coming to the permanent maxillary canine, like we had already looked at it, the eruption time is around 11 to 12 years. And for the permanent mandibular canine, it is a little bit early, like 9 to 10 years. Okay, so if you look at the eruption sequence of the deciduous dentition, it is always A, B, D, C, and E. Okay, A is the central incisor. Okay, then B, lateral incisor. D is the first molar. Then after the first molar only, the canine is getting erupted, and E is the second molar. Okay, so this is the sequence of eruption of the deciduous dentition. And if you look at it, the canine comes around like fourth in line. Okay, it comes around fourth in line of the eruption sequence. Okay, then coming to the permanent dentition, in the permanent dentition, in the mandibular arch, the sequence of eruption is 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. And for the maxillary teeth, it is 6, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, 5, 3, 7. Okay, there is difference between the maxillary arch and the mandibular arch for the permanent dentition. Okay, this sequence you should study because they can ask questions regarding the sequence of eruption also. Okay, so if you look at the mandibular arch, again the canine is coming fourth in line, whereas in the maxillary arch, the canines are getting erupted a little bit late, so it is getting coming in the around like the sixth in sequence. Okay, sixth in number. Okay, so this is the sequence of eruption of the deciduous and the permanent canines. Okay. Next is the dimensions. Okay. So the dimensions also, let's have a comparison and then study so that it will be easier for you. Okay. So in the dimensions, they are first mentioning the cervico-incisal length. Okay. So you should know what the cervico-incisal length and all is. Okay. So the cervico-incisal length means from the cervical line to the cuspal tip. Okay, so this measurement is the cervico-incisal length of the crown. Okay, so the cervico-incisal length of the crown is 10 millimeter for the maxillary canine, whereas it is 11 millimeter for the mandibular canine. Okay, so the mandibular canine is a little bit longer when compared to maxillary canine. Okay, remember that. Okay, the mandibular canine crown is a little bit longer when compared to the maxillary canine. But the length of the root, if you look at it, from the cervical line till the apex of the root. Okay, so that is 17 millimeter for maxillary canine, whereas it is 16 millimeter. Okay, just 1 millimeter less for the mandibular canine. Okay, so if you look at the total length of the root, okay, total length of the root, it is 27 millimeter for both the canines. Okay, whether it is the maxillary canine or the mandibular canine, the total length is only 27, but there is like a difference, like a small difference, a 1 millimeter difference between the root length and the crown length. Okay, crown length is more for the mandibular canine, whereas the root length is more for the maxillary. Okay. Then next you have to have a look at the mesiodistal diameter. Okay, so what do you mean by mesiodistal diameter? This diameter. Okay, this here and here. Mesial area and the distal area. So this mesiodistal diameter of the crown is 7.5 millimeter for the maxillary canine, and it is 7 for the mandibular canine. Okay, a little bit, the mandibular canine is a little bit narrow. Okay, then the mesiodistal diameter of the crown at the cervix. Okay, so there will be difference here, and the difference at the incisal tip and the difference at the cervical area is generally expected. So in the cervical area, the mesiodistal diameter is around 5.5, and it is the same for the mandibular canine also. The next is the buccolingual diameter of the crown. Okay, buccolingual means this is the buccal surface and this is the lingual surface. So this is the buccolingual diameter. Okay, so this buccolingual diameter is usually 8 millimeter for the maxillary canine, and it is only like 7.5 millimeter. Again, the mandibular canine is a little bit narrow when compared to the maxillary canine. Okay, like a 0.5 millimeter difference is there. Okay. The next is the buccolingual diameter of the crown at the cervical area. At the cervical area, it is just 7 millimeter. Same, it is just 7 millimeter for the mandibular canine also. The next is the depth of curvature. Depth of curvature means if you look at the tooth from the mesial aspect or the distal aspect, the cervical line will be forming a like a semicircular curvature like this. Okay, it will be forming a semicircular curvature like this. Okay, so we are measuring this semicircular curvature by drawing a straight line above it. Okay, so this determines the depth of curvature. So the depth of curvature will be usually very prominent at the mesial side and a little bit less prominent in the distal side. Okay, that is the usual case regarding the anterior. Okay, it will be a little bit uh, more prominent in the mesial aspect and less prominent in case of the distal aspect. Okay, so the depth of curvature of the cervical line in the mesial aspect, it is 2.5 millimeter. For the mandibular canine also, it is 2.5 millimeter. Whereas for the from the distal aspect, it is, if you look at it, it is just 1.5 millimeter. And for the mandibular canine, it's just 1 millimeter. Okay, so that's the difference in dimensions of the maxillary and mandibular canine. uh, Huge differences are not there, but yes, there are like small differences are there. Okay, coming if you look at the crown length and the root length and the depth of curvature and the buccolingual diameter also, there are small differences. Okay, you should have an idea about the dimensions of the maxillary and mandibular canine also, because that will really help you while doing your carving. Okay, so this is important. The dimensions are also important. Now, next is the, we will have a look at the maxillary canine from every aspect. Okay, so first we'll have a look at the crown of the maxillary canine from the labial aspect. Okay, so from the labial aspect, the crown of the canine is usually trapezoidal in shape like this. Okay, so it is trapezoidal in shape, and the crown and the root are narrower mesiodistally when compared to the central incisors. Okay, those central incisors, the crown and the root are a little bit flat and very broad, but in case of the canines, it is usually narrower. Okay, when compared to the maxillary central incisor. And if you look at it, the crown shape is also very asymmetrical. Okay, here and here, if you look at it, the crown shape is also some kind of asymmetry is also observed. Now, before going and explaining each of the outlines, let me tell you like which are all the outlines. Okay, so that you understand what I am telling. Okay, so this is the mesial outline. Okay, so this is the mesial outline of the crown. Okay, and this is the distal outline. Okay, so this is the distal outline. So when I am telling you like the mesial outline is straight or the mesial outline is convex, you should know where to look at. Okay, and this is the cervical outline. Okay, towards the cervical line, that is the cervical outline, and this is the incisal outline or the occlusal outline. Okay, and regarding the root, this is the mesial outline of the root, and this is the distal outline of the root, and this is the apex. Okay. So when I'm telling all these structures and telling all these things, you should know where you are, in which area I mentioned. Okay. Okay. And one more thing is that convexity usually refers to this. Okay, it will be like convex, like means like outer bulging, like that area is regarded as the convex. Concave means towards the inner surface like this. Okay, towards the inner surface like this. Convex is usually like this, and concave is usually like this. Okay, so that also you need to understand. Okay, now Okay, sorry for the technical problem. So I hope you all understand between the various outlines of the crown and the root. Now, if you look at the mesial outline, okay, so what I am referring to is this outline. Okay, so this is the mesial outline. The mesial outline from the cusp tip till the contact point. Okay, from the cusp tip till the contact point, it is like a slope. Okay, you see the slope here, it is like a convex slope here. Okay, so from the cusp tip till the contact point, it appears like a convex slope. And from the contact point till the cervical line, it is a little bit concave in nature. Okay, it is a little bit concave in nature. Whereas if you look at the distal outline is mainly S-shaped like this. Okay, so distal outline of the maxillary canine is usually S-shaped like this. And from the cusp tip to the contact point, it is convex. And from the contact point till the cervical line, it is concave in nature. Okay, a little bit of depression is seen. It is not much appreciated in this diagram, but yes, there is a little bit of depressed area. A concavity is seen in the labial aspect of the maxillary canine. Okay. Now, if you look at the incisal outline, okay, so this is the incisal outline or the occlusal outline, this outline. Okay, that is the incisal outline or the occlusal outline. This incisal outline can be described with two slopes. Okay, in the incisal outline, there will be two slopes. One is this mesial slope. Okay, so this is the mesial slope and this is the distal slope. Okay, so the mesial slope will be always shorter. Okay, you have to remember this. The mesial slope will be always shorter. Okay, and the distal slope will be always longer. Okay, this is very important because for the spotters also and while carving also, this point is really important. The mesial slope is always shorter and the distal slope is always longer, and they both meet at an angle of 90 degrees. Okay. And if you look at the cervical outline is convex or semicircular like this, and the curvature, it is towards the root portion. Okay, it is towards the root portion. Okay, so this is about the labial aspect of the crown. Now, if you look at the labial surface, okay, so how's the surface of the maxillary canine? It is smooth and convex in nature. And if you look at it, there is a very prominent ridge that is running from the cusp tip till the cervical line. Okay, so that ridge is called as the labial ridge. Okay, so there are something called as developmental lobes. Okay, so what are these developmental lobes? These developmental lobes are the structures from which the tooth is getting formed. Okay, the cusp structure is also getting formed from these developmental lobes. Okay, so there are three developmental lobes from which the canines are formed. Okay, the three developmental lobes from which the canine is formed are: the first one is the mesial lobe, then the second one is the middle lobe, and the third one is the distal lobe. Okay, so these are the three lobes from which the whole canine crown is getting formed. Okay, so sometimes what happens is this: there will be like a very prominent development or very like accentuated development of this middle lobe will happen. Okay, so that will result in the formation of something called as labial ridge like this. Okay, since it's a 2D view, you may not be able to appreciate it much, but when you look at the natural human tooth, you can see that there will be like a very prominent area on the labial aspect of this maxillary canine that is called as the labial ridge. Okay, now other than the labial ridge, the point where this middle lobe and the mesial lobe are getting separated, and the point where this middle lobe and the distal lobe are getting separated, there will be small grooves present in the incisal area like this. Okay, so these two are the two developmental grooves that are seen in the labial surface of the crown. Okay. Now coming to the root. the root of the canines is usually cone shaped. Okay, this is like a perfect cone shaped root, but the apex is not as sharp as the cone that is shown here. The apex is usually a little bit blunt. Okay, it is a little bit blunt, and you'll be able to see a distal tilt. Okay, you see this tilt of the root? Yes, that is usually towards the distal side. Okay, so when describing about the tooth, you have to describe about the mesial outline and the distal outline. Okay, so this is the mesial outline and this is the distal outline. So mesial outline, it is usually straight till the middle third. Okay, till the middle third, it is straight only. And from the middle third to the apex, it is tapering. Okay, you see the tapering here? Yes, it is tapering from the middle third towards the apex. Now, if you look at the distal outline is a little bit convex. Okay, you see this a little bit convexity is seen in the outline from the cervical third till the midline. Okay, and from the midline to the apex again, it is tapering. Okay, and at the end, it is showing a distal inclination also. Okay, the tip of the root, it will usually show a distal inclination. Okay, so this is about the labial aspect of the root. Now coming to the lingual aspect or the backside or the palatal aspect of the maxillary canine. If you look at it again, the crown is trapezoidal in shape like this. The parallel two lines will be seen and the unparalleled areas will also be there. So that will make it in a whole like a trapezoidal shape. Okay, and the outlines, okay, almost all the outlines like the mesial outline and the cervical outline and the incisal outline, they are all similar to the labial aspect only. Okay, the mesial slope is short and the distal slope is longer. Like that, all the outlines are very similar to the labial aspect only. Okay, but where the difference is coming is the lingual surface is usually a little bit narrower, and there are other structures that are present in the lingual surface, like the cingulum. Okay, we have a prominent cingulum at the palatal aspect with two marginal ridges. Okay, what are ridges? Ridges are linear elevated areas. Okay, so near the cingulum, you will be able to see two marginal ridges. One is mesial marginal ridge and the other one is the distal marginal ridge. Okay. Then there is another third ridge that is present on the lingual surface of the maxillary canines, which is called as the lingual ridge. Okay. So this lingual ridge, it extends from the cusp tip till the cingulum area. Okay. And the labial aspect, there was labial ridge, but here you have a small lingual ridge. Okay. So this lingual ridge divides the surface of this maxillary canine into two fossae. Okay. Fossae are like depressed areas. So there are two fossae also present, which is divided by this lingual ridge. So those two fossae are called as the mesiolingual fossae and the distolingual fossae. Okay, so if you look at it in the lingual aspect, there is a cingulum, there are mesial marginal ridge, there is a distal marginal ridge, and there is a lingual ridge. And on two sides of the lingual ridge, there are two fossae, which is called as the mesial marginal fossae and the mesiolingual fossae and the distolingual fossae. Okay, so this is about the lingual aspect of the crown of the maxillary canine. Now, if you look at the tooth also, the tooth is like similar to from the uh, labial aspect, cone shape, but a little bit narrower when compared to the labial surface, and it has a like a smooth and convex surface also. Okay, so somewhat the labial and the lingual like characteristics can be similar. Okay, there will be definitely a difference in the cingulum and the fossa and all, but somewhat the characteristic and the outlines will be usually similar between the labial and lingual aspect, and like that the outlines will be similar between the mesial and the distal aspect also. Okay, now coming to the mesial aspect of the permanent maxillary canine, as you can see, the crown shape is triangular. Okay, you have a triangular shaped crown, which is very bulky and prominent. when compared to the maxillary incisors. Okay, so the such a triangular or wedge-shaped outline you can see from the mesial aspect. And if you look at this triangle, the base of the triangle. Okay, so this is the base of the triangle. This base of the triangle is towards the root. Okay, and the apex of the triangle is towards the incisal tip. Okay, and if you look at it, this is the labial outline. Okay, this is the buccal area, or this is the labial outline, and this is the palatal outline or the lingual outline. Okay, so the labial outline, if you look at it, it is convex and it is smooth and it curves smoothly from the cervical margin to the incisal edge. Okay, so it is very smooth and producing a curvature very smoothly. And the height of the convexity of this maxillary canine is usually at the cervical third. Okay, it is the convexity of this labial portion is more. Okay, the height of the convexity is more in the cervical third. Okay, not in the middle third. The height of the convexity is more in the cervical third. Okay, then if you look at the lingual outline or the palatal outline, it is S-shaped. You see this S shape? Yes, it is a proper S-shaped outline for the palatal side is seen. And why this S shape? Because there is a prominent cingulum, and like from the cusp tip till the middle third, it is convex, and it becomes concave in the middle third. Okay, because of the fossa, it is becoming concave. And from the middle third till the cervical line, it is again becoming convex because of the presence of the cingulum. Okay, so this is how it is shaping. Okay, so that is about the mesial aspect of the crown. Now, the contact area in the mesial aspect. So the contact area in the mesial aspect is usually at the junction of the middle and the incisal third. So the teeth can be divided into three regions. Okay, we have the incisal third, then we have the middle third, and then we have the cervical third. These are the three thirds. Okay, a tooth can be divided into three thirds like this. Okay, so the contact area of this permanent maxillary canine, it will be usually at the junction of the middle and the incisal thirds. Okay, usually at this point, you will be able to see the contact area with the adjacent lateral incisor. Okay, the next is the cervical outline, the cervical curvature. Okay, the cervical curvature is convex in nature, and this curvature is towards the incisal edge, and the curvature is more. Okay, we had seen in the measurements, the depth of curvature is more on the mesial aspect than the distal aspect. Okay, and if you look at the incisal outline, the incisal ridge, it forms the apex of the triangle. Yes, it is triangular or wedge shaped, and the incisal edge, it forms the apex of the triangle. And the cusp tip is, it is located labial to the long axis of the teeth. Okay, so if you are drawing a long axis, the cusp tip will be usually located towards the labial side for the permanent maxillary canine. Okay, now coming to the root portion of the permanent maxillary canine, the root from the mesial aspect is very broad. Okay, you can see the breadth of the root from this aspect. Okay, it is very broad, and a vertical shallow depression is seen in the center of the tooth. Okay, a shallow depression is seen in the center of the tooth, which is the developmental depression. Okay, and if you look at the labial outline, this is the labial outline of the root, and this is the lingual outline of the root. Okay, so if you look at the labial outline is convex from the cervical third to the middle third. It is convex and tapers to the apex. Okay, just like the description of the other other root area, same here also, convex from the cervical third to the middle third and tapers towards the apex. Lingual outline, it is usually straight from the cervical third to the middle third, and gradual tapering towards the apical third is seen. Okay, so that's about the mesial aspect of the root of the permanent maxillary canine. Now, if you look at the distal aspect of the permanent maxillary canine, you can see that the cervical line has less curvature. Okay, the the depth of curvature is comparatively less when compared to the mesial aspect. Okay, and the distal marginal ridge is more heavier. Okay, so the distal marginal ridge is a little bit more heavier and irregular, and the distal surface is more concave above the contact area. Okay, so the contact area, it usually comes on the middle third. Okay, so for the if you look at the crown of the tooth from the distal aspect, the contact area, it usually comes in the middle third. Okay, whereas it is in the junction of the incisal and the middle third from the mesial aspect. Okay, the developmental depression is also present here, but it is not as pronounced. Okay, the developmental depression is not as pronounced also. Okay, so this is the major differences between the distal aspect of the uh, crown of the crown and root of the permanent maxillary canal. Okay, and coming to the incisal aspect. Incisal aspect, it is roughly ovoidal in shape like this, and the labiolingual dimension. Okay, so this is the labiolingual dimension. It is more than that of the mesiodistal dimension. Okay, so the mesiodistal dimension is comparatively less, whereas the labiolingual dimension is more for the permanent maxillary canine if you look from the incisal aspect. Okay, and another major thing that you can see is that the distal portion is there, right? This distal portion is like extended like this. The distal portion is like stretched. Okay, the distal portion is stretched to make contact with that of the first premolar. Okay, like that, it will be appearing for you when you look from the incisal aspect. Okay, so the proper asymmetry of the crown is very visible from the incisal aspect, and the distal aspect of the crown, it will be like stretched from, to contact with the first premolar. That's how it appears from the incisal aspect. Now, if you look at the labial outline, okay, the labial outline is convex and it makes the crown appear bulkier also. The lingual outline, it has the cusp ridge, the mesial cusp ridge and the distal cusp ridge are very prominently seen from the lingual aspect, and it is smaller than the labial outline, and the foci also, the mesiolingual foci and the distolingual foci. Okay, they will also be visible from the incisal aspect. Okay, so this is about the different aspects of the maxillary canine from various regions, like from the labial aspect, from the lingual aspect, from the mesial, distal, and the incisal aspect. Now, most of the students will write till the previous slide. Okay, but one more thing that you have to write regarding the maxillary canine, if a question on maxillary canine is asked, is about the variations. Okay, so what all variations you can see in the morphology of the permanent maxillary canine. Okay, that also should be mentioned because that is like an extra point. Okay, so what all variations you can see regarding the maxillary canine is there will be definitely something like a sexual dimorphism. Okay, sexual dimorphism means the canines will be different for females and males. Okay, this is a very important point because this will help the forensic odontologist. Okay, so during taking the bite mark pattern or for other things to identify whether the culprit is a male or a female, the dimensions of the canine can help a lot. Okay, so that's where this sexual dimorphism and in the forensic odontology, they plays a very important role. Okay, so for the males, the canines are a little bit bulkier. Okay, they are a little bit big in almost all dimensions. The mesiodistal crown width will be increased, the buccolingual width is increased, and the canine index is increased like that. The almost all the dimensions of the canine are increased in males when compared to females. Okay, so by looking at the canine itself, we can tell whether that person is a male or a female. Okay, we can predict the gender of the patient by just looking at the canine. Okay, so how cool is that? Now, next is the Bushman canal. Okay, so this is a example of a Bushman canal. Okay, so this Bushman canal will have prominent marginal ridges and it will have a prominent cingulum also. So the teeth, if you look at it, it will resemble like a premolar. Okay, so that is the importance of the Bushman canine, mostly seen in the Bushman people. That the it is like a race that is seen in the African regions. So such type of canine is usually seen in them. The next is tuberculum dentale. Okay, so this tuberculum dentale is nothing but this cingulum. This there will be like an accessory cusp that is present in the cingulum area. Okay, a very small cusp-like elevation that will be seen near the cingulum area. Okay, so that is called as the tuberculum dentale. Then there is something called as distal accessory ridge. Okay, so this is a typical example of a distal accessory ridge. You can see the distal accessory ridge, a small ridge-like elevation is seen in the distal side of the canine, maxillary canine like this. Okay, an elevated ridge that is extending from the cusp tip towards the cingulum area. Okay, so that is called as the an extra ridge that is present on the palatal surface of the canines, that is called as the distal accessory ridge. Okay, so these are some of the major differences or the major variations that you can see for permanent maxillary canines. Okay, variations is not a topic that every student writes, but if you write it, there are chances that the examiner will get more impressed. Okay, and will give you good marks. So that's all about the maxillary canine. Now we are moving on to the mandibular canines. Okay, so the mandibular canine, we had like I had mentioned in bits and pieces like the differences between the maxillary and the mandibular canine, but here we will discuss more in detail about the mandibular canine. The crown. Okay, the crown is like very narrower mesiodistally and it appears a little bit longer also, cervicoincisal. Okay, the root of the mandibular canines are shorter than that of the maxillary canine, but the crowns are a little bit longer when compared to the maxillary canine. And the labiolingual diameter also. The labiolingual diameter, it is also less. Okay, almost all the dimensions and almost all the features in the mandibular canines are less prominent when compared to the maxillary canine. Okay, especially if you look at the lingual surface, the cingulum and the fossa are all very prominent in maxillary canines, whereas it is very less prominent in case of the mandibular canine. Okay, so that is one of the major difference between the maxillary and the mandibular canine. Now, if you look at the mandibular canine from the labial aspect, you can see that the shape is usually trapezoidal shape. You can call it like inverted trapezoidal shape also. Like roughly trapezoidal in shape, just like the maxillary canines, and the mesial outline is straight. Okay, so this is one point of the mandibular canines which you can use to differentiate it from the maxillary canines. The mesial outline is straight, almost straight like this. And another thing is that this mesial outline is like continuous with that of the root. Okay, the mesial outline, it is straight and it is like continuous towards the root surface also. Okay, so the mesial outline, it is straight from the incisal edge to the cervical line and the contact area is near the incisal third. As you can see, the contact area is a little bit high. It is towards the incisal third. Whereas in the distal outline, if you look at it, it is more rounded. Okay, the distal outline is more rounded and contact area is near the junction of this incisal and middle third, a little bit lower when compared to the mesial outline. Okay, it is towards the junction of the incisal and middle third, and from the contact area to the cervical line, it usually produces a straight line. Okay, from here to here, it is usually convex. Tip to the contact area, it is usually convex, and from the middle third till the cervical line, it is usually straight in nature. Okay, Now, coming to the cervical line, if you look at it, again, a semicircular curvature is produced, and this curvature is towards the root end of the crown. Okay, so these are some of the uh, points you can write regarding the labial aspect of the mandibular canal. Okay, now if you look at the incisal outline, okay, incisal outline, again, there is a mesial cusp slope and a distal cusp slope is there. Just like the maxillary canines, the mesial cusp slope is shorter and the distal cusp slope is longer. Okay, so as you can see, the mesial cusp slope is shorter and the distal cusp slope is longer in nature. Okay, and the incisal outline, the contact area, okay, it is also located at different level. One is at the incisal third, whereas the other one is a little lower and located at the junction of the incisal and middle third. Okay, so that's a major difference between the mesial side and the distal side. Now, another one, the labial surface, how the labial surface is. Okay, till now we are talking about the outlines. Okay, so how the crown outlines are. Now we are talking about the surface, that is the labial surface. The labial surface is also convex, but the convexity is less when compared to the maxillary canine. Okay, the maxillary canines, they have like a prominent labial ridge like that and all is present. But here it is not as prominent and it is not as convex as that of the maxillary canine. Next, coming to the root surface. Okay, so if you look at the root, there is the mesial outline and there is the distal outline. The mesial outline, it is usually straight from the cervical line to the middle third, and from the middle third, it usually tapers. Okay, just like we described the root of the other surfaces also, it's the same. And mild mesial inclination can be seen. Okay, there for the maxillary canine, it was like mild distal inclination, whereas here it is mild mesial inclination can be seen. Okay, and the distal outline also, it is mildly convex from cervical third to the middle third, and from the middle third, it tapers. Okay, so this is the root aspect from the labial side. Okay, and it's also cone shaped in nature. Now coming to the lingual aspect of the permanent mandibular canine, very similar to the maxillary canine, but all the features will be less prominent. Okay, there is a distal cusp ridge, there is a mesial cusp ridge, and it is like roughly trapezoidal in shape. All the outlines and all the ridges and all the foci are very similar to the maxillary canine, but only the difference is that it will be all will be less prominent and smoother than that of the maxillary canines. Okay, and if you look at the root, there will be lingual taper will be seen along the entire length of the root, and there will be lingual convergence also. Okay, so this is about the permanent mandibular canine. Now, looking at it from the mesial aspect, it will be triangular or wedge shape, and the base of the triangle is towards the root, and the apex of the triangle is towards the incisal edge. Okay, so this is the labial outline, and this is the lingual outline. And labial outline, if you look at it, there will be a mild convexity from the incisal edge to the cervical third will be seen. Lingual outline, just like the maxillary incisors, it will be S-shaped. Okay, it will be S-shaped like this. And if you look at the cervical outline, there will be a curvature will be seen, and the depth of curvature is more than the distal aspect. Okay, just like what we had seen in the maxillary canine, the same is getting repeated for the mandibular canine also. Shallow depression can also be seen in the mesial aspect. Okay, very shallow depression can also be seen. Okay. Then next is the incisal outline. Incisal outline is usually broader when compared to the other anterior teeth, and the cusp tip is either in line, or if you draw other long axis towards the root apex and the crown tip, it will be either in line or it will be towards the lingual side. Okay, and the contact area, it is usually seen in the incisal third here. In the incisal third only, the contact area will be seen for the mandibular canine from the mesial aspect. And we had already described about the wedge shape or the triangle shape. Okay. And like I had already mentioned, there will be a developmental depression which will be very deep from the mesial aspect when compared to the distal aspect. And the labial outline, it is straight. Okay, the label outline, it is straight from the cervical third to the middle third, and from the middle third, it tapers. Lingual outline, it is also straight from the cervical third to the middle third, and from the middle third, it tapers. Okay, just like we had discussed about the outlines of the other roots, other from the root from the other aspect, very similar. Okay, here also the shape is triangular or wedge shape, and the curvature is less. The depth of curvature is comparatively less when compared to the mesial aspect. Only 1 millimeter depth of curvature is there. All the other outlines are very similar. The contact area is at the junction of the incisal and middle third. Okay, towards here. Okay, so the mesial contact area is a little bit lower towards the incisal third, but the distal contact area is a little bit higher. Okay, it will be on the junction on the of the incisal and the middle third. Okay, the outlines of the root are also very similar. It will be like straight till the middle third, and from the middle third towards the apex it tapers. Here also it will be straight till the middle third. From the middle third to the apex it tapers. Okay. Now, next is the incisal aspect of the mandibular incisor. From this aspect itself, it's like very evident that it has like a roughly ovoidal in shape. And look at the distal side. Okay, the distal side is like very prominent and stretched. Okay, it's like stretched to contact the first premolar. Okay, just like that, here also it is like very prominent and stretched to contact the adjacent first premolar, and it shows a lingual tilt and the labiolingual width. Okay, the labiolingual width, just like the maxillary canine, here also the labiolingual width is more when compared to the mesiodistal width. Okay, so the labial outline, it curves towards the distal side. There's a little curvature that is seen in the distal side, and the distal incisal ridge is also a little bit concave in nature, like this. Okay, you see this area? Yes, that it is a little bit concave in nature, and it slants also more lingual side. Okay, more towards the lingual side, there will be slant also seen. Now, if you look at the lingual outline, it is convex. Okay, the convexity of the lingual outline is seen. And the mesial and the distal margins, they converge to the form the cingulum. Okay, so this red color portion, that is the cingulum. So this distal marginal ridge and the mesial marginal ridge, it converges to form the cingulum. And the marginal ridges and the lingual fossa are less prominent when compared to the maxillary canines. Okay, like already mentioned, all the features seen in the maxillary canine will be less prominent in case of the mandibular canine. Okay, so till now, till the last slide, like every student will write about the all the points. Okay, but next this variations. Okay, next again variations of the permanent mandibular canine. What are the commonly seen variations? One is bifurcated root. Okay, two roots can be seen. Okay, normally only one root is seen, but in some cases, okay, in majority like this is a very common variation also. Okay, like around like 30 to 40% of the cases, some kind of like bifurcated roots like this will be seen. Okay, it will be usually one root is called as the labial root, and this is called as the lingual root. Okay, so such type of bifurcated roots are very commonly seen for mandibular canines. Now, other than bifurcated roots, you can see the tooths with extreme curvature. You see this? Yes, just like dilaceration. Yes, tooth with extreme curvature like this will be seen. And look at the length of this mandibular root. Okay, very long, right? Yeah. Such variations are also observed for permanent mandibular canines. Okay. Now, next, this slide is all the features of the maxillary canine and mandibular canine that we have discussed till now in a nutshell. Okay, and this is the table that you have to draw and present when they ask you about the differences between the maxillary canine and the mandibular canine. Okay, so the maxillary canine, it is wider mesiodistally, whereas mandibular canine, it is narrower mesiodistally. Maxillary canine is less elongated, whereas mandibular canine is longer and slender. Okay, the dimensions of the both the teeth, the total dimensions of the maxillary and mandibular canine are same. It is 27 millimeter only, but crown is longer for mandibular canine and root is longer for maxillary canine. You should know the difference and you should remember this also. Okay. So the maxillary canine has the longest root in the dentition, and whereas the mandibular canine, it has the shorter when compared to the maxillary canine. It has the longest crown in the dentition. Now coming to the labial ridge, the all the other features like the lingual fossa, the labial ridge, the lingual ridge, and the other features will be less prominent in case of mandibular canine, whereas it will be like really very sharp and pointed in very prominent in case of the maxillary canine. Whether it is like the labial ridge or the cusp tip position, the mesial cusp ridge, or the cingulum or the lingual anatomy, everything is like very prominent in case of maxillary canine. It is less prominent in case of the mandibular canine. Okay. And the outlines. Okay. The mesial cusp ridge and the distal cusp ridge. Okay. The mesial cusp ridge will be always shorter when compared to the distal cusp ridge. Okay. This is very important because that determines the side of the tooth, whether it is like left-sided or right-sided, can be determined with the help of this mesial cusp bridge alone. Okay, so this mesial cusp bridge is always shorter in canine, whereas it will be longer in the distal cusp bridge side. Okay, then the mesial outline is also very bulging, convex for the maxillary canine, and it will be usually straighter and continuous with the root in case of the mandibular canine. Okay. Whereas for the distal outline, it is also convex for the maxillary canine. It is, of course, it is also curved than the maxillary canine, but less curvature is. Okay. And the incisal edge, the cusp tip will be towards labial to the root axis, whereas the cusp tip for the mandibular canine will be placed lingually to the long axis of the root. Okay. Then the contact areas are also different. At the mesial, it will be junction of the incisal and middle third, whereas for the mandibular canine, it is the incisal third. And distally, it is the middle third for the maxillary canine, whereas it is the junction of the incisal and the middle third for the mandibular canine. Okay, so whatever we had discussed in this session, it is all like converged into a nutshell in this slide. Okay, so you know the differences between the maxillary and the mandibular canines. Now, if they ask you to carve the canine, okay, usually the commonly asked tooth for the carving is the maxillary canine. Okay, so when you get the wax block, what you can do is that first mark the crown and the root portion. Okay, based upon the dimensions of the tooth, mark the crown and the root portion. Okay, then mark the areas, like which is the labial area going to be, which is the palatal area going to be, which is the mesial area going to be, and which is the distal. Okay, which side is that? Okay, so you have to mark that also. Then mark the, in from the mesial side, mark the outline of the tooth. Okay, outline of the crown area. Okay, like this. There will be convexity in the labial area and an S-shaped region in the distal area. Okay, like that, you have to put an outline and then start carving it. While carving it, one thing that you have to remember is that there is like a very prominent ridge on the labial aspect of the canine. So first mark the ridge and then carve it in slopes. Okay, carve it in slopes, and so like that, carve the lingual area also, the palatal area also, with the cingulum and the lingual fossa also. Okay, cingulum area, carve it like very less, and the foci area, like make sure that you are not like depressing it too much. Okay. Okay. Like make it smooth. Okay. Make the foci smooth in the lingual area. Now, once the crown is completed, once you finish the labial and the lingual sides itself, the mesial, start with the mesial and the distal sides, and the mesial and distal sides, like less carving can be done. And then once the crown is completed, go to the root area. Okay, root, you can remember that there will be a little bit distal inclination. Okay, there will be a little bit inclination towards the distal side. Okay, remember that. And since it's a long root, please make sure that you are not breaking it while carving. Okay, and once all the carving procedures are finished, then polish it thoroughly. Okay, polish it well and then submit it. Okay, then there you can expect the canines for as spotters also. They can give you a natural human canine tooth and ask you to identify which tooth is that. Okay, so first we need to identify whether it is a maxillary tooth or a mandibular tooth. Okay, so how to identify whether it is a maxillary tooth or a mandibular tooth? Very easy. Whatever we had discussed it till now, it is mainly based on that. Look at the lingual surface. Okay, look at the lingual surface. If the lingual surface is like showing prominent cingulum and prominent lingual fossa like this, then it is maxillary canine. If the lingual fossa is like much similar to that of the mandibular incisors with a very less prominent cingulum and less prominent single fossa, like a fossa like that, then it is the mandibular canine. Okay, so that is the major difference between the maxillary canine and the mandibular canine. Now, once you like identify whether it is the maxillary canine, usually it will be bulkier and a very prominent cingulum. Like all those features will be there. Mandibular canine, again, the crown will be a little bit longer and a straight mesial outline. Okay, look at the mesial outline here. That can also be looked for. Okay, so these are some of the tips to identify whether it is the maxillary canine or the mandibular canine. Now, other than that, after identifying whether it is the maxillary canine or the mandibular canine, then you have to look for whether it is the left side or the right side canine. Okay, so how you can identify it is by looking at the mesial cusp slope and the distal cusp slope. Okay, so the mesial cusp slope is always shorter. Okay, the mesial cusp slope is always shorter like this, whereas the distal cusp slope is longer like this. Okay, there are other methods also, but this is one of the easiest. So please study this alone and don't confuse too much by looking at the other features also. Okay, just look at this. The mesial cusp slope will be usually shorter and the distal cusp slope will be usually longer in nature. Okay, so once you identify the mesial cusp slope, look where the mesial cusp slope is. Okay, if the mesial cusp slope is on the left side, then it is a maxillary left canine. Okay, so this canine is maxillary left canine because the mesial cusp slope is on the left side. Okay, so this is a maxillary left canine. Now, look at this teeth. Okay, here the mesial cusp slope is here again in the left side. Okay, so this is a mandibular left canine. Okay, so this is how you identify the tooth. If the mesial cusp slope is on the right side, then it will be a maxillary right canine and a mandibular right canine. Okay, so that's how you identify the sides. Okay, so this is one of the ways by which you can identify the tooth for your spotters exam, practical examination. So try this out after the theory examination. I think you will get some time to practice for the practical examination. So at that time, please try this out and see whether it's working for you. Okay. So that's all for today. I think like there is like too much dental anatomy for this today. Okay, if you have any doubts, you can ask now. Or if you don't remember the doubts now, you can ask me in the WhatsApp group or you can comment below this video. Okay, we will definitely answer all your queries. Okay, so good luck for your examinations. Do well, read well and revise well, and keep on revising and keep on reading. Okay, so all the best for your examination. Do well. Good night and goodbye.